Longbox Review, episode 50. Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Welcome to the show. It is episode 50. I wanted to do something special for this episode to commemorate not only 50 episodes, which isn't as much as a big deal as this. It's also to commemorate 3 years that I've been doing the podcast. By the time that I release this episode, it will be the week that I released it back in July of 2010. So 3 years I've been doing this, 50 episodes, give or take. There are 50 episodes that are numbered. I actually have an episode 0 that I just kind of ignore. That was my first outing as a podcaster, and it was painful to listen to the few seconds that I did in preparation for this. Let's see. There are 50 numbered episodes, and that's what I'm sticking to in reference to this. So 50 episodes and 3 years. Thank you, first of all, to everyone who listens, everyone around the country, around the world, in fact. I have many listeners in the UK, so thank you very much for them. Thank you very much to them. And as well, other places around the world, such as China, a few from Canada, Australia, Japan, and a few from Finland, France, Korea, and Mexico. And that's just the latest stats that I've accessed here in the last month or so. So let's see. So 50 episodes. What can I say about this? This episode, I wanted to do something special, of course. I'm not too big on the whole commemorating numbered things, much to my wife's chagrin, but I did want to make special note of this, even though it's not like a landmark episode of, 100 or 500 or 1,000. The guys at Comic Geek Speak have been doing this for years, and they're up to, I don't know, almost 1,400 episodes. That's what it is. Still, it's a big deal to me. Wasn't sure if I would be doing this for this long, 3 years, like I said. And 50 episodes, so I keep saying 50 a lot. Well, you're going to hear that a lot because, like I said, I was trying to figure out a way to commemorate this, and I was racking my brain. So I thought I would do, like what's typical. I've seen in other podcasts, do a clip show to commemorate however many episodes that they were commemorating, and I just didn't like that idea. Plus, it would take a lot of time for me to go back and listen to those past 49 plus episodes and choose, bits and pieces from each one. I figured out it was like 70 hours worth of audio I'd have to go through. And even going at it like, 1.5 speed or double speed, that would still take a while for me to do. And I didn't want to spend that much time on something like that. So instead, I'm going to do this, and I have to thank my wife for helping me brainstorm this idea. So we were driving to, interestingly enough, my local comic shop, which is 80 miles away, the comic book shop in Spokane, Washington. So if you're listening to this and you're, somewhat local to that area and you haven't checked out the comic book shop, you really should. It's a great place. Let's see. So we were driving on the way to Spokane to the comic book shop, and I was telling Kitra, my wife, about this predicament I was in. I could not think of something really interesting and special to do for this episode. And she said something about, well, what can you do having to do with the number 50? And that got me thinking, and together we decided that this episode should be a top 5 collection. So to commemorate number 50, I'm going to give you 10 top 5s of various topics. So here are my top 5 in the categories that follow. And just so you know, these are not, I chose these particular items in each top 5 because I didn't want to overthink it. I didn't want to overdo it. I just wanted to, whatever came to mind when I thought of these categories, that's the choices I made. In some cases, it was easy. It was really easy, and I have to admit some of them are kind of pedestrian, as you'll find out. Well, maybe it's just a little too easy choices in my mind, but I just wanted to get these out really quick. I may come back and talk about these again in some future episode and maybe do a top 10 because in some of these cases it was really, really hard to choose 5 out of these in each of these categories. So here we go. Let's get into the top 50 for episode 50 of the Long Box Review podcast. First up, top 5 villains. Let's see. These are, again, in no particular order, so I'll just run down them. Lex Luthor, the number 1 Superman villain. Joker, that's for Batman, of course. Green Goblin for Spider-Man. Green Goblin left a huge impression on me when I first started reading comics because one of the very first comics that I bought was a Marvel Tales, which featured a reprint of the issue in which Gwen Stacy died. And, of course, Green Goblin has a lot to do with that. And it's just just visually such a cool character with that, the green mask and the maniacal face, the pumpkin bombs, the goblin glider, just a really cool character. I chose for Batman again. There's 2 Batman villains in here. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's or Raz? So that's always been the debate. When I first started reading comics, I always pronounced it Ra's al Ghul. And then I heard or read an interview with Denny O'Neil who said it was pronounced Ra's. And so that's how I've been pronouncing it for years. And then the Batman Begins movie came out, and everybody referred to him as Ra's al Ghul. So, I don't know. I kind of like saying Ra's al Ghul. It sounds more exotic than Ra's. So, there you go. Ra's al Ghul. And then finally, Darkseid. What a great villain this guy is. I thought it was really cool that when Justice League relaunched with the New 52, that they brought in Darkseid as the villain that brought the team together to fight in that first storyline. I thought that was just an excellent choice there. He's been a great Superman villain, especially in the Superman the Animated Series, which I'll talk about later. So seeing Superman go up against Darkseid, especially at the end of the Justice League Unlimited cartoon series, that was phenomenal. So there you go. I'm not going to say much about Lex Luthor and Joker, though. I think everyone who reads superhero comics knows why those 2 are the top villains for those particular heroes. So there you go. I had a bunch more, but again, I'm trying to keep this to top 5 and just kind of a more or less a surface look at these categories. So there you go. That's top five villains. Next up, top 5 heroes. And again, so these are the heroes that, when I thought of, okay, what are my top heroes? These are the ones that jump to mind. All right. So, and some of these are somewhat obvious as well. However, so let's start off with Batman, of course, because he's just awesome. Who doesn't like Batman? Daredevil, Spider-Man, Superman, and I'll wait to get to the last one. So let me just back up a little bit. So Daredevil, for some reason, has long been one of my very favorite Marvel characters pretty much since the beginning. I probably discovered Daredevil in the early to mid 80s. I know I've read some earlier issues of Daredevil, but he never really captured my imagination until I think around Daredevil, what was it, number 198, 199, 200, around that time. There's a cover with Daredevil who had a cast on. Anyway, my friend was reading, I believe it was Greg. My friend was reading that comic at the time. And of course, back then we all read each other's comics. And so I got to read all these great comics, even though I didn't buy them. Anyway, Daredevil captured my imagination about that time. And I haven't looked back ever since. There was that's not true. There was a time where I had stopped collecting Daredevil after the Typhoid Mary run. The first time that Typhoid Mary shows up in that. And I stopped for a while and then came back when Bendis and Malev was doing their stories on Daredevil, and just immediately fell back in love with the character, and I've been reading pretty much everything that's Daredevil related ever since. Let's see. I said Spider-Man. Spider-Man, like I just mentioned, with the villains, with Green Goblin. Spider-Man is a character who's two comics of the original 3 that I bought were Spider-Man comics. So, and I read a lot of Spider-Man back when I was first starting to read comics. Plus, there was the Amazing Spider-Man TV series. There was the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends animated series. The movies more recently. So, Spider-Man's been a huge part of my life, comic reading life anyway. I dressed up one Halloween in a makeshift Spider-Man costume that comprised, the only thing that was licensed was the plastic mask with the little rubber band. The rest of it I kind of threw together myself. I wore blue jeans and a blue dress shirt. And I somehow got some red fabric, cut it out so that it would form more or less the shape of the red area on Spider-Man's costume. I drew on the webbing and the spider on the chest, and then I was able to tie it around my neck and my waist. And that was my Spider-Man costume for that year. I used to have a picture of that. I really wish I could find that. If I ever do, I'll post it on the blog so people can make fun of me. But I thought it was pretty cool. And then, okay, so that's 4 of the top 5 heroes. And finally, the last one that I chose, Robin. Robin has been a huge part of my life, comic reading life, and otherwise, growing up. Of course, that started with the new Teen Titans version of Robin, but I went back and read all that I could having to do with Robin because of that, even those awful Teen Titans issues, DC trying to be relevant to teenagers back then. And I've followed the character of Dick Grayson as Robin, into his Nightwing persona, into Batman and back. But it wasn't just Dick Grayson. It was the Dick Grayson of Earth 2 as Robin. It was Jason Todd as Robin. Although I'm not all that keen on Jason Todd as a character now, and his Red Hood persona, but when he was Robin, before they killed him off, I thought, it was an interesting departure from the Robin that I knew and loved as Batman's sidekick. So, and then on to Tim Drake, which I think is probably one of the best Robins basically he's the best Robin to me, aside from Dick Grayson, and probably even a better Robin as a partner to the Batman. So I know there's a lot of Tim Drake detractors out there. I'm looking at you, Travis. But I particularly like him. Stephanie Brown had a stint as Robin, which I actually I bought some of the issues in which she was Robin. I haven't read all of them, so I'm looking forward to discovering how Stephanie Brown performed in that role. And also, of course, there's Carrie Kelly from The Dark Knight Returns. And of course, there is the most recent Robin in the New 52 Batman comics anyway, Damian Wayne, a character that I actually did not like all that much to begin with, but man, that character grew on me, and I ended up loving the guy. So when they killed him off, I was pretty sad to see that, because I wanted to see where that father-son dynamic could go with Batman. And who knows? I'm sure there's a bunch of other interstitial Robins that I'm forgetting, but those are the main ones. All right, let's move on. Top 5 teams. Again, this is easy. I'm just going to run down them real quick and then talk about them. Justice League, Teen Titans or some variation of the Titans, the Legion of Superheroes, the Justice Society, and Secret Six. And I realize now that these are all DC, much I'm doing a lot of DC stuff. And if anybody knows who's listened to the podcast for a while, those are the comics that I read the most of growing up and still do, although I'm reading a lot more independent and quite a bit of Marvel now. So it's not just DC for me, but it is a large part, especially if we're talking about the history, my comic book reading history. So that will inform a lot of these lists. Like it or not, that's just how it is. So let's get back to that. Top 5 teams. So Justice League, that's the granddaddy of teams for me. I knew the Justice League before I knew the Justice Society. I'll get to that in a minute. It's got the biggies in it: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, and others throughout the decades. What more can I say about the Justice League? I can't wait for a Justice League movie. How about that? Let's see. I'll come back to the Titans. Legion of Superheroes. I'm not even sure that I can do justice on this. The Legion loomed so large in my life, in my early comic book reading life. I think my very first Legion comic was I don't remember the issue, but it was one where Bouncing Boy, Duo Damsel, Colossal Boy, and Shrinking Violet. Maybe it was Element Light. Oh man, I should have looked this up before. Anyway, they were off in space, and some of the characters were in dire straits. The Legion cruiser, something was wrong with it, and they had to work together to get out of the predicament, which of course they did. But that was my first Legion comic, and then I found one of the DC digests that reprinted a bunch of Jim Shooter stories from the Legion back when he was just a wee lad doing that. And so we had the Time Trapper. No, not Time Trapper. It was Mordru. It was, wow. See, this is what happens when you get old. Your memory starts playing tricks on you. Or if you're just not prepared for your own podcast. Because I don't know what exactly I'm going to say until I start recording. Anyway, so no, it was the Fatal Five story. Such great drama and melodrama and relationship stuff and just fun adventure comics for me to read. So I've pretty much gotten all of the Legion of Superheroes, the Superboy in the Legion, its own title, the 5 Year Later, some of the stuff that came after that, the Mark Waid run on the I guess reimagined Legion of Superheroes. A lot of the Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning stuff I kind of skipped over for some reason. And I got back into Paul Levitt's returning to Legion. I was really excited about that, but that hasn't turned out to be so great. Not just for me, because the DC canceled it not too long ago. The final issue hasn't come out yet, but it soon will be, the last Legion of Superheroes, at least for now. It will be back. It's such a great concept. All those characters, the science fiction-y type stuff that's in there. It's just rife with great stories and great characters and possibilities. So it will be back. Let's see here. Justice Society. Yeah, okay. So I discovered the Justice Society characters again through one of those DC digests. And I had no idea what, Earth 1 and Earth 2 was until I picked that up. And that just blew my mind. A multiverse of superheroes, some of whom had the same names, but they were different characters or different looking. Just great stuff. Although I do remember there was a 2 or 4 pages in that DC digest that explained the difference between Earth 1 and Earth 2. And what they did is that they showed pictures of, this Superman and that Superman, this Batman and that Batman. They look the same. They're the same characters. And then they showed Aquaman and Dr. Fate. And I thought, oh, so those two are the equivalents between Earth 1 and Earth 2? Of course, that I found out later that was not true, but, the way that particular segment in that digest was portrayed, it confused me a little bit. But, interesting to think that maybe Aquaman and Dr. Fate are somehow doppelgangers of each other on different Earths. Well, it was for me anyway. Let's see. Secret Six. That is this. I said before I didn't want to overthink it. This is one of those categories where I did kind of overthink it. I originally had another group on here, but I realized that of the list, I had about, 10, 11 things on the teams list. Secret Six was on there, and I'm looking it over, and I realized that more recently, the Secret Six and what Gail Simone and the various artists on that series did was very compelling, such great stories that it overshadowed the other group that I had chosen. And while they're a great group, just what the Secret Six title did for me as a reader had just loomed larger in my mind, at least right now, than that other group. And that's sort of how I chose some of these entries in these top 5 lists. Is that I was looking back at the history of it in my mind, and if they had a great impact on me, either emotionally as I was reading this stuff, or just over time, I've gotten so much, all the various volumes, editions, or whatever you want to call them, that obviously has its own impact. So I was just kind of looking at how these titles and these characters and these situations, these stories affected me, and so that does inform my choices here. Speaking of that, Teen Titans, the final of this in this category. Wow. Out of everything that I've collected over the last 30 plus years, the Titans and their various incarnations, the various titles, all the different characters that have come and gone, they've been my favorite team of all time. Sometimes there are certain times when, say, the Legion was maybe hit the number 1 spot for a while, but the Titans always return. Even though right now I have to say the Teen Titans title from the New 52, it's not really hitting a home run for me, but I still love the characters. I love the idea of it. These sidekicks, these teenagers getting together to do their own thing, to prove themselves, and everything that goes with it. I just absolutely love that. All right, next up, top 5 artists. Okay, here's where we're getting into the lists that it was really, really hard. I have a huge list of artists here. How do you narrow it down to just top 5? Mostly I had to think about who are my go-to guys, who are the artists that I constantly tell people, when people ask me, who's your favorite comic book artist? What are the names that pop up immediately? So that's where I went. There's a lot of great artists out there. A lot of great pencilers, a lot of great inkers, color artists, although I don't think I have specific color artists on my list. There's just a lot of great artists in general out there, but primarily these are people that are known for their penciling, at least in my experience, and for various reasons. But let's get to it. So I mentioned Titans in the last list, looming large as far as teams. So I have to go with George Perez as one of my top 5 artists. Alex Ross, Neil Adams, Alan Davis, and just like the Secret Six choice here, a more recent addition to the list, J.H. Williams III. So all very great artists in their own right, for various reasons. Perez, I just adored his work on the Titans and other things. He's not always the best at drawing some other characters I've noticed over the years. I don't care for his Wonder Woman for all that much. I don't care for his Superman all that much, but he really did New Teen Titans very well, and he's just done a lot of great stuff over the years. His Avengers work was really good too. Neil Adams, obviously, Batman, Green Lantern. He's an old school guy. He's great. When I first got into comics and actually started drawing my own stuff, I would draw various characters, that I loved, and then I started drawing my own characters. But the style that I gravitated towards was a Neil Adams, George Perez-esque realism I guess, if you will, that I particularly liked. Let's see, Alan Davis. I just love Alan Davis. Anything he does, I love. Just, good, clean line work. It's recognizable. I guess that to some people that might be a detraction, that he hasn't really changed all that much in all these years, but I just, everything he does, I just think is great. So, J.H. Williams III, I had to debate about that one, but his work on Batwoman has been phenomenal. So just his design sense. It's not necessarily his line work, but and his line work is good because he can do multiple styles that work well for the story that they're telling. Like I said, in Batwoman, the stuff that he does when Batwoman is the central focus of that particular part of the story is just incredible. The stuff that he does when it's Kate is different enough, but still recognizable, and just works well with the kind of storytelling he's doing. And then just his design sense on the page, the way he breaks up panels and does various designs on the page, bat designs or some sort of sigil on there. It's just really cool looking stuff. And then finally, Alex Ross, painter extraordinaire. I first encountered his work on Marvels and Kingdom Come. I think it was Kingdom Come first, and then I discovered Marvels. But it's just like, wow, this is amazing. I have a poster of his Justice League up in my room. I have one of one of the art books that DC put out called Mythology. Just looking at the Kingdom Come omnibus, just great stuff. I love his work. He's really good with like the still pictures. I don't know that he's so great with sequential storytelling. I think Kingdom Come was made of all the stuff I read of his. I think Kingdom Come and Marvels was his strongest work in that regard. I won't say that I've read everything by, especially all these artists. I haven't read everything that they've ever done, but of the stuff I have read and looked at over the years, those two works stand out in my mind. But I absolutely love his still pictures, his portraits, if you will. Oh, and I'm forgetting that those oversized books that he did with Paul Dini. Those were fantastic. Okay, moving on from artists, I now go to my top 5 writers. I'm just going to list them and then talk about them. Neil Gaiman, Mark Waid, Grant Morrison, Brian K. Vaughan, and Jonathan Hickman. Okay, and boy, this list was even longer than the artist list because I've always been primarily focused on the story of comic books. Art has always been more or less secondary to me. But because it's always about the words and the emotion that gets across, and I realize I'm doing a disservice to the artist, the other creators involved, because they, for the most part, comic books are a collaborative effort. A large part of the story comes from the artist, but I tend to think of what I'm reading, literally reading on the page. That's the writer. So. I tend to gravitate more towards them. I chose writing as a focus when I went to school, so because I can't draw all that great, but so writing has a particular place in my heart. So anyway, get back to my top 5 comic book writers. Neil Gaiman, primarily on the work that he did on Sandman. It's that strong for something that lasted 75 issues and ended years ago. Neil Gaiman's work on that title earned him a spot on this list. And I read a lot of his fiction, and it's really good too. But I'm not judging him on that. It's just the work on Sandman was excellent. Mark Waid, he's written a lot of my very favorite stories over the years. He has really interesting ideas when it comes to these characters. He's a bit of a comic book historian, so he knows a lot about the history of these characters and what they've gone through. So, and he was the writer on Kingdom Come, which is one of my very favorite stories of all time. So, I think he's a good, solid writer. Come back to Mr. Morrison, Brian K. Vaughan. When I was making up this list, I started listing a bunch of titles that were my favorite, and we'll get to the top 5 series here in a bit. And I realized that a lot of the series that I was listing were written by Brian K. Vaughan. And pretty much anything that guy does just speaks to me. And he's very consistent. He tells really interesting stories. He's doing Saga right now with Fiona Staples, and that's just blowing my mind. It's phenomenal stuff. More recent addition to this list, before I end it with Mr. Morrison, Jonathan Hickman. This guy can just, he's got such cool ideas, really cool ideas. I think I first encountered him on S.H.I.E.L.D., that limited series that really hasn't ended, but it hasn't come out in, it's been months and months, if not a year or two now. But I followed him into Fantastic Four, which was fantastic, if you'll pardon the pun, and now into his Avengers and New Avengers and Manhattan Projects and other stuff, East of West. Just really, I think he's on par a bit with Brian K. Vaughan. Brian K. Vaughan does character stuff really well, and Hickman does, concept and plot really well. Not that he doesn't do character well, he does, but he's a really good idea man, and I love his ideas. So finally, Grant Morrison. What can I say about Grant Morrison? Besides, the guy's just brilliant. I know that a lot of people don't like Morrison's work in general, or don't like particular things that Morrison has done. But his run on Animal Man. What else is just? He's done so much stuff. His Batman work in the last several years has just been great. He wrote All-Star Superman, which is what people hold up as this is the best Superman story that we've ever had, perhaps. His Action Comics New 52 run was, I thought, really great. Batman Arkham Asylum, We Three, just so many good ideas. Such a great writer. I can't wait to see what he does next. All right, next up, top 5 movies. This was pretty easy. There's not a whole lot of superhero movies to begin with, but here are my top 5. Superman the movie, the first one with Christopher Reeve. Watchmen, Avengers, Batman Returns, and that might be a bit of a surprise to some of you out there, and X-Men 2. Okay, so let's do the last two first, X-Men 2 and Batman Returns. So for some reason, I really dig, and I haven't seen these in many years, but I really dig the sequels to those movies. Batman was really cool to see Batman on the big screen for the first time, but it was when we get into the Batman Returns where he goes up against Catwoman, the Penguin. I think the style of the movie, just something about it seemed really cool. Michael Keaton seemed more comfortable in the role. I just really like that one better than the original Batman. And yeah, I do have I had the Nolan films on here as well as on the list, but I really like Batman Returns, at least in the way that I am thinking about it, remembering it better than the Nolan films. I know I'm gonna get some flack from some of my friends for that, but oh well. X-Men 2, I just thought was, once we got introduced the whole idea of X-Men, and of course, X-Men just blew everybody's minds when it came out. This is how you could do a really cool, not cheesy superhero film with a bunch of different characters and superpowers being shown, and it worked really well. But I particularly liked X-Men 2 better for some reason. Just like I like Spider-Man 2 better than any of the other Spider-Man films. So I don't know what it is about the sequels, the second films in these trilogies, I guess. But for some reason, I like them better. Avengers was just awesome, and you can go back and listen to the episode in which Greg and I did a review of that movie, and that was episode 26, Avengers Movie Talk. It was just really cool. Great superhero fun, humor, drama, destruction. Joss Whedon, and all those characters from all the Marvel movies showing up, as a group together. That just Marvel did a really good job bringing that into the cinematic universe, the cinematic superhero universe. It was just good. Superman the movie, the one for me that started it all. I know there were superhero movies before that, but it was Christopher Reeve's performance, Richard Donner at the helm of that movie. That as the tagline said, made you believe a man could fly. And it was just, I don't know. I love watching it. I still hate the whole turning back time thing, but up until that point, it was just a very human story. The bit, when Pa Kent dies in the movie and Clark just feels powerless and he's lost hope, and then he becomes Superman, and there's the whole bit with Lois Lane, that scene where he's cradling Lois just gets me every time. And when he screams out and his voice is echoing throughout the land, it's just it sends chills down my spine. Gene Hackman as Luthor was, campy but a lot of fun. That was just a great, fun movie. And then finally, Watchmen, which is my number one superhero movie. Zack Snyder did an awesome job of bringing the page to the screen, and I love the story. I love the special effects. I think it's just a really good superhero movie. And we'll see over time how that plays out, given that we have a bunch of new superhero movies this year, with Iron Man 3, Man of Steel, etc. It's just too soon for me to kind of gauge how those newer movies fit in with these others that loom pretty large in my mind. All right, from movies to TV, we're going to talk about the top 5 animated series. And again, this is pretty easy because really there haven't been that many superhero animated series. But these are still all of my favorites. You have Batman the Animated Series, which kind of started it all in the 90s as far as animated superhero series. Then you got Superman the Animated Series, which they followed up with a year or two later, I think it was. And while not as successful or as well regarded, I think, in the comic book community, Superman the Animated Series, I actually like that just a bit better than Batman the Animated Series. Then more recently, we have Batman Brave and the Bold, which actually I didn't like at first. I thought it was too cheesy, too campy, a bit too 60s Batman for my taste. But I kept watching it, and it really grew on me, and to the point where I really, really loved it. And then we have my top two, Young Justice and Justice League / Justice League Unlimited. I think of the Justice League and the Unlimited part, that's all one and the same. To me, just like Young Justice / Young Justice Invasion, it's all really the same. They just retitled it for some reason. But let's talk about Young Justice. So much like I said about the Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes, just teenage superheroes, the sidekick angle, you get Young Justice in there with all of the sidekicks telling their story, with the Justice League involved peripherally. It was just the animation style was just fantastic. It may actually end up being my very favorite animated series, at least so far. I don't know, who knows what the future will bring, right? But it broke my heart when they canceled that after 2 seasons. So And then Justice League Unlimited. Boy, when that was out, I can't remember if it was the first or second season. That was actually my favorite television show that I was watching at that time. I looked forward to a new episode of Justice League more so than anything else I was watching at that time. You get the Justice League, my favorite team, right, or one of my favorite teams, together in the animated universe, DC universe, and what great episodes they had there. That whole, like I mentioned that before with in regards to Darkseid, when the Justice League went up against Darkseid and Superman let loose with his full power, that we'd never seen that before because he's always been holding back, and that was just a great scene. The whole romance between Batman and Wonder Woman that they started there, I thought that was great, and I kind of wish they would have done something more with that in the comics. They did a little bit, but people just quickly forgot about it, I guess. There's just too many great episodes and themes running through Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. Oh, and then just Unlimited, when they brought in, a ton of DC characters, not even focusing on them necessarily, but showing them in the background. That was just, really cool to go, oh, look, they got this guy or they got that girl, whatever. It was great. Great fun. So there you go. That's the animated series. Okay, here we go. The last few. These were the ones where I really had to think about them. Yep. The last three. Limited series. We'll start there. Top 5 limited series. First up, Ronin. The Dark Knight Returns. Blackest Night, The Golden Age, and Superman for All Seasons. Okay. Ronin by Frank Miller with Lynn Varley on colors. Wow. That comic blew my mind back then. I think that was Frank Miller post Daredevil coming over to DC. My memory's a little fuzzy on that, but I didn't know who Frank Miller was really, besides the Daredevil stuff. But it was his Ronin, where it's like, holy crap, this is what comic books can do. Just the storytelling. And I have to admit, I didn't like his art on that series that much at first. In fact, I did not even buy the first issue. But I had friends who did, and I read it, and it blew me away. And so I bought issue 2 on. In fact, I actually bought issue number 1 because it was really hard. I don't know why, but it seemed really hard to find or to get recent back issues where I lived, the comic shop that I ordered from, which was right when the whole direct market was first coming into being. So there was one comic shop in the valley in which I lived, and then another one popped up, and it was closer to my house, so I started going to that guy, and that was it. And other than that, you bought comics in the supermarket, off spinner racks or on magazine shelves, and that's where you got comics, at least where I grew up. But Ronin was one of those titles that I picked up. Like I said, I bought it from a friend. It took me a long time to convince him to let me buy that from him. But he did. He handed it over. And just crazy, crazy stuff. This story that's set in the past, but it's in the future. Just the crazy ideas and the visual storytelling was just nothing I'd ever seen before. In fact, I should probably go back and reread that. In fact, I should just go buy the Absolute Edition of that. So, something to put on the wish list. The Dark Knight Returns, another Frank Miller. Big surprise there. Klaus Janson on inks, Lynn Varley again on colors. Again, that blew my mind. Frank Miller just really had some excellent ideas, 25, 30 years ago? Not that he doesn't now, but when he first burst onto the scene, at least from my viewpoint, it was just like, holy cats, who is this guy? What can I say that hasn't already been said about The Dark Knight Returns? This is where we get the goddamn Batman essentially started. Batman is this old guy coming back into it. No holds barred, pretty much. New Robin, Gotham City that's even worse than the one that we were familiar with. Just a great look at age and regret and hope in the end. Hope would, and a huge and a really awesome Batman versus Superman fight. Let's see here, Blackest Night. So that's one of the newer entries on this list. It's just I came up with I had about another 3 or 4 topics for these top 5. One of them was events. Blackest Night was on that, but I decided not to do that one. But the reason I did put it on that events list was because was based on the strength of the limited series, The Blackest Night. This is by Jeff Johns, Yvonne Hayes, various inkers, and Alex Sinclair on colors. And I wanted to point out Mr. Sinclair's work on this because I think the Blackest Night event would not have been as interesting visually if not for Sinclair's colors. But what a great story, focusing through the lens of the Green Lantern universe, but impacting the entire DCU as we know it, pre-New 52 anyway. Well, I guess it's still in canon in the New 52, but, whatever. Just a great idea, great storytelling, even though it was zombies. That was probably one of the better uses of zombies in comics, in my mind. Anyway, I just really liked it. One of the best events from DC or Marvel, in my mind. Recent memory. The Golden Age by James Robinson, Paul Smith on the art, and Richard Ory on colors. That is a story, I mentioned Justice Society before. So you get a version of the Justice Society retold through the lens of Robinson and Paul Smith. But it's very much a self-contained story. It's the end of the Golden Age, and you get, at the very end of the series, you get a tiny bit of the DC Universe slipping into the Silver Age with Captain Comet showing up at the end. But just a great tale. It was one of those where I actually worked in a bookstore here locally for a couple years, and I was just looking up comics actually on the book order program that we had there, and came across this thing called the Golden Age. I'm like, what is that? Because I missed it, and so I ordered it. Came in. I was so excited that day that I came into work because I knew that trade had arrived, and pretty much I sat there and read the whole thing. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to just thumb through it a little bit and then take it home and savor it. And I started reading it, and I could not put it down. Fortunately, we had no customers for that half an hour to an hour, however long it took me to read it. But I read through that entire thing, and it's one of those comics that I constantly go back to my bookshelf and pull it out and flip through it. I've read through it several times, cover to cover, but every once in a while I just like to look through it because I love Paul Smith's art. James Robinson's story was just fantastic. The focus on Alan Scott as one of the major characters I thought was inspired and made me fall in love with Alan Scott as Green Lantern even more. Finally, I have here one of my very favorite stories of all time, and that's Superman for All Seasons. This is by Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale on the art, and Bjarne Hansen on colors. This is just one of those Loeb-Sale collaborations that they did, but for some reason, that story just gets to me. The story of a father and a son, the story of this new hero struggling with his place in this world, with this maniac trying to toss him out, make him feel an outsider, more of an outsider than he already is. But it's really just the story of family and connection to the family. There are just certain parts of that just, I'll admit it, it literally makes me cry, which doesn't happen very often. I'm pretty much a cynic when it comes to a lot of things, but when it comes to great storytelling involving family and the father-son dynamic, especially, because I got a father-son thing in my own life, so whenever I encounter that in fiction, it just grabs or pulls on the heartstrings, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, Superman for All Seasons does that, and just the great way that Loeb and Sale put it together in terms of seasons. Each book, each of the 4 books is a different season in the year in the life of Superman Clark Kent. So I can't say more great things about this. It's just, if you haven't read it, even if you're not a Superman fan, you should read it because it will convert you to be a Superman fan. All right, top 5 graphic novels. Boy, this was hard. So there's some caveats here. So I don't have that many original graphic novels in my collection. So what I did was I chose stories that were collected in a trade form, whether it's paperback or hardcover, doesn't matter. Whether it's in one edition or multiple editions, doesn't matter. Or volumes, I should say, not editions. But it has to be a complete story. So with that in mind, I chose the following: Batman Arkham Asylum, Strangers in Paradise, Watchmen, Kingdom Come, and Sandman. So I talked before with Neil Gaiman in regards to his work on Sandman, so I'm not going to say much more about that. Just what great storytelling, what a fantastic ride that was, the entire 75 issues, plus, I think they had a special or two. But Sandman was a story about stories. It's very meta in that way, and Neil Gaiman had a handle on that like nobody's business. It was also the title that opened my eyes to various artists' styles, because there was a rotating team of artists. I guess not rotating. There were many different artists on many different story arcs. But it really forced me to accept and eventually love the various styles of comic book artists out there. Let's see, Kingdom Come. Like I said, it's probably my favorite. I may have said it is my favorite, but I kind of go back and forth. But it is definitely one of my very favorite stories of all time. Again, you have this dystopian future of the DC universe with Superman at the heart of it, and he's one of my favorite heroes, like I said before. So having him be that focus was really cool. The dichotomy of Superman and Batman, especially in that story, with Wonder Woman kind of tying the two together, or at least being in the middle of them, was really great. And there's a whole part of that story that's about faith. And to me, it doesn't have to necessarily be just religious faith, but faith in yourself. That just speaks volumes to me. So, really good story. Watchmen comes back, is one of my favorite superhero movie. It's also one of my very favorite stories. I mean, when we were kids growing up, reading Watchmen month to month, with everything that Alan Moore poured into that, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, wow. I mean, that Watchmen showed me what comic books could be as art. Art with a capital A. I eventually went to school and got a degree in English, so I've read a lot of novels, a lot of stories. Everything that's in Watchmen, you would find in examining great literature in a classroom somewhere, or just at your local library for that matter. So much depth and breadth to that work. It's staggering, and I don't think has been paralleled by anything that comes to my mind. Now, you may think of something, and if you do, let me know, but I can't really think of anything that comes even close to what Watchmen attained. Batman Arkham Asylum. Let's see here. Wow, this is by Grant Morrison and Dave McKean. Again, that's another title that, when it came out, just blew my mind what kind of storytelling it could be. This was a Batman story that I'd never had encountered before, at least at that level, in that depth. And just McKean's art was just blew me away. I'd never encountered anything like that before, really. It was beautiful, a beautiful story. And it took me a long time to really get it, especially the end there. But it was frightening and awesome at the same time. And it was also the very first hardcover that I ever ordered. So this came out in 1989, and I did not have a whole lot of money back then. I was working a just over minimum wage job at the time. You know, I was working maybe 20, 30 hours a week. Did I have a car then? Can't remember. I definitely had a girlfriend. So a lot of my money was not going towards comic books. So based on everything I was reading monthly, for me to order, I think at that time it was $20. No, $25. To order a $25 hardcover I took a huge leap of faith when I ordered that. I don't know why. Look, I tried to think about that before I started recording, and I cannot remember why I decided to order that book. Because Grant Morrison, I don't think was well known to me then. I don't remember when Animal Man came out. I think it was after that. I can't recall. I certainly did not know Dave McKean's work at that time. But for some reason I did, and it's been one of the best books in my collection ever since. And finally, Strangers in Paradise by Terry Moore. This is funny. This is another funny story, at least to me. I did not originally pick that up. We bought that because there was one time my wife and I were in the comic book shop, and for some reason, she's not a comic book reader, just to let you know. But for some reason, she was in one of those moods where she wanted to find something to read. And she's done that a couple times since. Bone was one of those other ones, but that came later. Strangers in Paradise was the first one. And that came at a recommendation by one of the ladies that was working at the comic book shop in Spokane at that time. I can't remember her name. But she recommended Strangers in Paradise. And so we got the first volume of that. So this is the collection, I can't remember what they call them, but there are 6 volumes of it. It's the smaller size collections. They're black and white. So we got that, and of course, you know, I spent the money on it. I never read it. I'd always heard it was really good, so I read it too, and fell in love with that story, with those characters, Kachu and Francine and all the rest. It was just an amazing ride. A great examination of a relationship. In fact, my wife dropped off after I think volume 2 or 3, and I ended up reading the entire series. I ordered them for myself after that first volume. So if you haven't read Terry Moore's opus, you are definitely missing out, so you should check that one out. Okay, here we are. The final top 5 for the episode 50. You get 50 tops with this, ending with the top 5 series. Here we go. New Teen Titans, Legion of Superheroes, Daredevil, Planetary, and Powers. This was by far the longest list of all of them. I kept adding to it as time went on. As I was thinking about this, in fact, I did change this a few times as far as the series. I've already talked about a lot of these: New Teen Titans, Legion of Superheroes, Daredevil. All just really great stories over the years. Really great characters, really great creators involved. New Teen Titans and Legion, more or less hand in hand. You know, they were of the comics that I gravitated towards. Those two were the ones that really held on to me over the years. For various reasons, and I won't go into those, but I've already talked a little bit about that in the previous top 5s. But Daredevil, the same. Once I discovered Daredevil, and what an interesting character. The Frank Miller stuff, especially the Brian and Michael Bendis stuff that came later. You know, just really great stories about this really interesting character and the situations. All right, the next two. Planetary and Powers. So again, Brian Michael Bendis on Powers, but those are more recent additions to this list in my mind. Powers, just the concept just blew me away, and the Michael Avon Emming art was just quirky enough that it worked. It was cartoony, and yet contrast that with the violence and the sex the adult themes going on and situations in the story. It was just really interesting mix. It was really, really good stuff. It still is. I'm enjoying it. But those first few volumes were just like, wow, this is crazy, crazy stuff. Same goes for Planetary with Warren Ellis and John Cassaday doing that. I got those all in trade. I got most of the powers in trade until the more recent series, but Planetary was all trade. I couldn't imagine having to wait. How many years was it between the next to last issue and the last one? Anyway, fortunately they released that last trade shortly after the last issue came out, so I was able to to read the ending to the story not too long after those that were getting the floppies did. But talk about crazy ideas, such a high concept. I mentioned before how I pull out, what was it, Superman for All Seasons and flip through it. I do that on Planetary a lot too, especially that first volume, and with these three characters, Elijah Snow, Chiquita Wagner, the drummer, and just the crazy things that they investigate and situations they get themselves into. Just really cool stuff. I wish that could have gone on just longer, just to get those really cool characters and stories going, or keep them going. So, well, that's it. That is my top 50, the top 5 list, 10 of them for you to commemorate episode 50 and the 3-year anniversary of the Longbox Review podcast. Thank you so much again for downloading the episodes, for those that have left comments, all of the people that have appeared on the show in the past, primarily, of course, my friend for life, or much of my life, I should say, Mr. Travis, for being my usual co-host. He'll be back on very soon, I'm sure. And to you, the listener, again, thank you, like I said, for downloading and staying with me all this time. If you have, I really appreciate that. If you're a new listener, welcome. I hope to continue to entertain and inform as well if I can. If you have any feedback you'd like to leave about these top 5 lists that I've given you, tell me I'm crazy for including or not including various items in those lists. Let me know. Let me know what your top 5 in these categories are. If you'd like to leave feedback on this episode, please do so by emailing longboxreview@gmail.com. You can also leave voicemail at 208-953-1841. Leave comments about individual episodes at the blog at longboxreview.wordpress.com. Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. You can also find Longbox Review on Stitcher. The Longbox Review podcast is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.